A white cop beats black doctor for face tattoos, finds her husband owns the police force. Dr. Maya Carter adjusted her stethoscope as she stepped out of the hospital, the crisp night air brushing against her face. After a grueling 18-hour shift saving lives, she felt the deep ache in her shoulders and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Her car waited in the near-empty lot, a small sanctuary promising rest and respite. The delicate patterns of her face tattoos, a proud testament to her heritage, shimmered faintly under the streetlights as she approached. She didn't notice the patrol car until it roared to life, red and blue lights slicing through the stillness. Her stomach dropped. Confusion morphed into unease as Officer Luke Davis approached, his hand resting on his weapon. "Evening, ma'am," he barked. "You know why I pulled you over?" Before she could reply, his gaze locked on her tattoos. His sneer was unmistakable. "Gang signs? I don't think so." Moments later, the unthinkable happened. Under the weight of his blows, her world blurred, but her resolve only sharpened. This wasn't just about her. It was about a system steeped in corruption. And Maya Carter was about to uncover the truth, even if it meant tearing down everything, including her husband's secrets. Dr. Maya Carter was the kind of doctor who thrived in chaos. Born to immigrant parents, she learned the value of perseverance and resilience early on. Her upbringing in a tight-knit community instilled in her an unyielding drive to serve others, and it was this drive that propelled her through medical school and into the chaotic world of emergency medicine. At 34, she had already become the lead attending physician at one of the busiest urban hospitals in the city. Her professional demeanor was sharp and focused, matched by a kind smile that reassured even the most frantic patients. Her tattoos, intricate and symbolic, stretched across her cheekbones and down her neck, a bold declaration of her cultural heritage and personal strength. For Maya, the tattoos were more than art, they were her armor, telling the world she would not be erased or diminished. Away from the hospital, Maya lived a life of quiet simplicity. She and her husband, Ethan, resided in a modest townhouse nestled in the city's historic district. Ethan, a charismatic businessman, carried his share of secrets. While Maya's work revolved around saving lives, Ethan's world dealt in influence, his investments quietly supporting key pillars of the community, including the city's police department. Their marriage was a partnership built on mutual respect, though not without its challenges. Maya's grueling hours often kept them apart, but they both believed in the power of their work. Yet lately, Maya had noticed a growing tension in Ethan's demeanor, his phone calls more frequent, and his gaze more distant. When she asked, he would deflect with reassurances, promising her he was handling some complicated business deals. Maya's days followed a grueling rhythm: emergency surgeries, managing a high-stakes team, and delivering bad news with grace. But that night, the monotony of her routine shattered. Pulled over by Officer Luke Davis, the weight of her tattoos became a weapon in his hands, a justification for violence rooted in bias. The brutal encounter wasn't just an isolated act of aggression. It was a crack in the veneer of her city, exposing a web of systemic injustice. Bruised but unbroken, Maya returned home to Ethan, her mind racing with questions. As he comforted her, she noticed the emblem on the badge she'd picked up from the ground, a family crest that bore an eerie resemblance to the logo on documents Ethan had once hurriedly stashed away. Maya's resolve hardened. She wasn't just a doctor or a victim, she was a fighter. And as much as she loved Ethan, she would uncover the truth, even if it meant unraveling the world they had built together. The bruises on Dr. Maya Carter's face were barely concealed by the makeup she applied that morning. As she stood in front of her bathroom mirror, she traced the outline of the swelling near her cheekbone, a stark reminder of the prior night's brutality. The events replayed in her mind like a haunting film: the flashing red and blue lights, Officer Davis's sneering disdain, and the blows that left her feeling powerless. It wasn't just physical pain, it was the realization that her identity, her tattoos, her heritage, was used as a weapon against her. Ethan hovered in the hallway, concern etched across his face. "Maya," he began hesitantly, "we need to talk about what happened." She turned to face him, her jaw set. "I'm going to report this." What that man did to me wasn't just assault, it was a hate crime. Ethan nodded, though his expression darkened. I support you, he said carefully. But this isn't going to be easy. Davis has connections. Powerful ones. If we're not careful, they'll bury this before it even gets to court. Maya's eyes narrowed. You sound like you know more than you're saying. He hesitated, then shook his head. Just trust me. You'll need to tread lightly. Maya's resolve didn't waver. She drove to the precinct later that day, her heart pounding as she stepped through the heavy double doors. The desk officer barely looked up when she announced she was there to file a complaint. You can fill this out, he muttered, sliding a clipboard across the counter. As she detailed the assault, a shadow fell over her desk. She glanced up to see a tall, stern-faced officer with piercing blue eyes. His name tag read, Captain Daniel. Dr. Carter, he said evenly. I heard about the incident. I'll make sure this is investigated thoroughly. Maya wanted to believe him, but his measured tone and the flicker of unease in his eyes betrayed him. Thank you, she said coolly, clutching the clipboard. She noticed how his gaze lingered on her tattoos before he turned and walked away. Later that evening, Maya sat in her living room, sifting through hospital records on her laptop, trying to distract herself. Her phone buzzed. The message was short and chilling. Drop the complaint or face the consequences. She stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. Her first instinct was to call Ethan, but a sinking feeling made her hesitate. Instead, she forwarded the message to her friend Clara Morales, a fellow doctor who had always been a voice of reason. This is escalating quickly, Clara said when they met for coffee the next morning. You can't let them intimidate you. Have you considered going public? If they think the world is watching, they'll think twice before pulling something. Maya sipped her coffee, her mind racing. If I go public, it could get messy. And Ethan, he's already nervous. I think there's more to this than he's letting on. Clara leaned in, her voice dropping. What do you mean? Maya hesitated. I found something. On the badge Davis dropped during the assault, there's a family crest. It matches one I've seen on documents Ethan had, documents he's been hiding. Clara's eyes widened. You think Ethan is involved? I don't know, Maya admitted. But I'm going to find out. That evening, Maya waited until Ethan left for a late meeting. She searched through his home office, her hands trembling as she rifled through files. Finally, she found a folder marked with the same crest. Inside were contracts and financial records that tied Ethan's company to the city's police department, and to funding allocations that seemed suspiciously large. Her stomach churned as realization dawned. Ethan's business deals were more entangled with the corruption she was fighting than she had ever imagined. When Ethan returned home, Maya confronted him, the folders spread out on the kitchen table. What is this? She demanded, her voice trembling with anger. He froze, his eyes darting between her and the documents. Maya, it's not what you think. Then tell me what it is, she snapped. Because right now, it looks like you've been funding the very people who've been protecting Davis. Ethan sank into a chair, his head in his hands. It's complicated. I invested in the police force years ago, thinking I could help reform it from the inside. But it's deeper than I realized. Davis and his ilk, they're untouchable. I've been trying to fix it, Maya. I swear. Her heart ached at the desperation in his voice, but she couldn't ignore the betrayal. You should have told me, she said quietly. Instead, you let me walk into this blind. Ethan reached for her hand, but she pulled away. I'll fix this, he promised. We'll fix this together. Maya didn't respond. She turned and walked to the bedroom, closing the door behind her. Alone in the dark, she knew one thing for certain: the fight ahead would test everything she believed in, her marriage, her community, and her resilience. And she was prepared to face it, no matter the cost. The days following Maya's confrontation with Ethan were fraught with tension and unease. She went through her shifts at the hospital in a daze, her bruises a visible testament to the violence she endured. Colleagues offered sympathetic glances but avoided direct questions, sensing the weight she carried. At home, the silence between her and Ethan grew heavier, punctuated only by terse exchanges about daily logistics. Maya wasn't willing to let the matter rest. Late one night, after Ethan had gone to bed, she reopened the folder of documents she had found in his office. As she flipped through the pages, a pattern emerged. The contracts tied to the police department revealed payments funneled into untraceable accounts. One name appeared repeatedly in the paperwork: Captain Daniel. The same officer who had promised her an investigation. Her pulse quickened as she jotted down notes and cross-referenced the information. She needed someone who could help her decipher the financial trail, someone who could connect the dots. Her first thought was Clara Morales. Reliable and resourceful, Clara had already proven to be an anchor in this storm. The next morning, Maya met Clara at a diner tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. She slid the folder across the table. "I need your help," she said. Clara flipped through the pages, her brows furrowing. "This is serious. If what you're suggesting is true, there's a web of corruption here that goes way beyond Davis." Maya nodded. "I need to expose it. But I can't do it alone." Clara leaned back, her expression thoughtful. "We need someone who knows how to navigate this kind of territory. A journalist, maybe? Someone who's used to taking on powerful people." "I know someone," Maya said after a moment. "Sarah Collins. She's worked on police corruption cases before. I'll reach out." Sarah was a firebrand journalist with a reputation for uncovering uncomfortable truths. When Maya called her later that day, Sarah was intrigued but cautious. "If I'm going to risk my career on this, I need to see everything you have," she said. They met that evening at Sarah's office. As Maya and Clara laid out the documents and explained the connections, Sarah's expression shifted from skepticism to determination. "This is explosive," she said. "But it's also dangerous. You'll be putting a target on your back." Maya's voice was steady. "The target's already there. If we don't act, they'll keep getting away with it." The trio decided on a strategy. Sarah would begin digging into the financial records while Clara helped Maya compile a timeline of events, from the assault to the uncovering of Ethan's ties. Together, they would build an airtight case to present to both the media and the authorities. As their investigation deepened, the threats intensified. One evening, Maya found a brick thrown through her living room window. Attached to it was a note. "Stop or you'll regret it." Ethan's face darkened when he saw it. "We need to call the police," he said. Maya shook her head. "And report it to who?" "The same people who are behind this." "No. We keep moving forward." The tension between them boiled over that night. "You're risking everything," Ethan said, his voice rising. "Our home, our safety, us. And what do you expect me to do?" Maya shot back. "Sit quietly while they destroy lives? While they destroy me?" Ethan sighed heavily. "I just don't want to lose you." Her anger softened, but her resolve didn't waver. "You won't. But I need you to stand with me, Ethan. Not against me." They reached a fragile truce, but the distance between them remained. Maya threw herself into the work, finding solace in the collaboration with Sarah and Clara. Each new piece of evidence they uncovered was a small victory, but it also brought new dangers. One evening, Sarah called with a breakthrough. "You need to see this," she said, her voice urgent. At Sarah's office, she showed them a series of emails she had obtained. They were correspondence between Captain Daniel and a shadowy figure identified only as H. The emails discuss payments, cover-ups, and plans to suppress any investigations into police misconduct. "Davis," Maya said, her voice cold. "It has to be him." Sarah nodded. "These emails are damning. But we need more. If we can tie this to the higher-ups, we'll have an undeniable case." The next step was risky. Sarah suggested reaching out to a whistleblower within the department. After careful consideration, they contacted Detective Miguel, an officer with a reputation for integrity. Miguel was hesitant at first but agreed to meet them in a secluded park. Under the cover of darkness, he shared what he knew. "Davis isn't acting alone," he said. "There's a network protecting him. And it goes all the way to the top." "Why haven't you come forward?" Maya asked. "Because the moment I do, my career, maybe even my life, is over," Miguel replied. "But I can give you evidence. Enough to make sure they can't ignore you." He handed them a flash drive containing internal memos, recordings, and surveillance footage. It was the smoking gun they had been searching for. But the victory was short-lived. That night, as Maya drove home, she noticed a car following her. She tried to shake it, weaving through side streets, but it stayed on her tail. Her hands tightened on the wheel as panic set in. Finally, she pulled into a crowded gas station, hoping the presence of witnesses would deter whoever was tailing her. The car slowed, its headlights glaring, before speeding off. Maya sat in her car, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She knew this wasn't over. The next morning, Sarah published an exposé with the evidence they had gathered. The response was immediate and explosive. Protests erupted across the city, demanding accountability and justice. The police department issued a statement promising an internal investigation, but Maya knew it was only damage control. In the days that followed, Maya received both support and backlash. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, but others hurled threats and slurs. Through it all, Ethan stood by her side, their shared determination slowly mending the rift between them. As the movement gained momentum, Maya realized the fight was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had been silenced, everyone who had suffered under a broken system. And she wouldn't stop until justice was served. The city seemed to be holding its breath as protests intensified in the wake of Sarah's exposé. Streets were filled with chants demanding justice, the crowd's energy a mixture of anger and hope. Dr. Maya Carter watched from the window of her home, her heart heavy but resolute. The evidence they had uncovered had brought the city to a boiling point, but she knew this was just the beginning. Maya's phone buzzed, pulling her attention away. It was Clara. "Maya, we've got a problem," Clara said, her voice strained. "Detective Miguel just called me. His house was broken into last night, and he's terrified. He thinks they know he's helping us." Maya felt a chill. Miguel had risked everything to provide them with crucial evidence. "Where is he now?" she asked. "He's staying with a friend outside the city. He's safe for now, but he's considering backing out. He's afraid for his family." Maya's stomach nodded. Losing Miguel's testimony would be a blow to their case. "We need to make sure he's protected," she said firmly. "I'll talk to Sarah. Maybe she knows someone who can help." Sarah arrived at Maya's house later that evening, her expression grim. "This is what they do," she said, pacing the living room. "They intimidate and isolate until people are too scared to fight back. But we can't let them win." "What do we do?" Maya asked. Sarah stopped pacing and turned to her. "We double down. We release more of the evidence Miguel gave us. If we go public with everything, it'll make it harder for them to silence us. The more eyes on this, the safer we are." Maya nodded, though a small voice in the back of her mind warned her that this would escalate the danger. Still, she couldn't afford to back down now. The next morning, Sarah published a follow-up report, including internal police memos and surveillance footage that directly implicated Captain Daniel and other high-ranking officers. The report was damning, leaving little room for denial. Media outlets picked up the story, and public outrage grew. Calls for an independent investigation into the police department echoed across the city. But the backlash was swift. That afternoon, Maya received an anonymous email. "You're playing a dangerous game. Back off before it's too late." She showed the message to Ethan, who frowned deeply. "This is getting out of hand, Maya. You need to think about your safety." "And what about everyone else?" she shot back. "If I stop now, nothing will change. Davis, Daniel, all of them, they'll keep getting away with it." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I just don't want to lose you." Maya placed a hand on his. You won't. But I need you to trust me. The tension between them was interrupted by a knock at the door. Ethan opened it to find Clara, her face pale. We have a situation, Clara said, stepping inside. Sarah's office was broken into. They took her laptop and hard drives. Maya's heart sank. Was she hurt? No, but she's shaken up. She thinks they were looking for the unpublished evidence. Do we have backups? Ethan asked. Clara nodded. Luckily, yes. But this shows how far they're willing to go. Maya clenched her fists. Then we hit back harder. That night, they worked together to consolidate their evidence and distribute it to multiple trusted allies. Sarah coordinated with other journalists to ensure the story would continue spreading, even if something happened to her. Meanwhile, Clara reached out to community leaders, rallying more people to their cause. Despite their precautions, the pressure took its toll. Maya found herself glancing over her shoulder, her nerves frayed. Ethan became more withdrawn, his worry manifesting in restless nights and curt conversations. The strain threatened to pull them apart. One evening, as Maya reviewed case files in her home office, Ethan walked in, his expression unreadable. We need to talk, he said. She looked up, bracing herself. About what? About this fight. About us. He sat down across from her. Maya, I'm proud of you. I am. But I'm scared. These people, they're dangerous. And I feel like I'm watching you walk into a fire, and I can't pull you back. Her resolve softened, and she reached for his hand. I'm scared too. But if we don't stand up to them, who will? He squeezed her hand tightly. Then we do this together. No more secrets. No more half-truths. Whatever comes, we face it as a team. Maya nodded, tears brimming in her eyes. Together. The following day, Maya and Ethan attended a rally organized by local activists. The crowd's energy was electric, their chants echoing through the streets. As Maya took the stage to speak, she felt a surge of determination. We are here today because we refuse to be silenced, she began. Because justice is not a privilege, it is a right. We stand together to demand accountability, to demand change, and to demand a future where no one has to live in fear of those meant to protect us. The crowd erupted in cheers, their support bolstering her courage. But as she stepped off the stage, her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a live news alert. Breaking: high-ranking police officials implicated in a corruption scandal. Sarah's latest report had just gone live, and it was the most damning yet. She had uncovered bank records linking Daniel and his associates to illicit activities spanning years. The fallout was immediate. Calls for resignations flooded the airwaves, and the mayor announced plans for a federal investigation into the department. But the victory was bittersweet. That night, Maya received another anonymous message. You've gone too far. There will be consequences. Despite the fear that crept into her heart, Maya stood firm. She knew the battle was far from over, but she also knew she wasn't alone. With Ethan, Clara, Sarah, and an entire community by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next. The courthouse was packed, a buzzing hive of tension and anticipation. Dr. Maya Carter sat at the plaintiff's table, her hands clenched tightly together. To her left was Ethan, his presence a steadying force despite the unease that had lingered between them in recent weeks. Sarah and Clara sat just behind her, their confidence and determination palpable. Across the aisle sat Captain Daniel and Officer Luke Davis, their legal team exuding arrogance. The trial had been grueling. Over the past few days, the courtroom had seen a parade of witnesses, evidence, and arguments. Today, it all came down to this: the closing arguments and the final testimony that would either cement their case or undo it entirely. The defense calls Officer Luke Davis to the stand, the opposing lawyer announced, his voice steady and controlled. Maya's chest tightened as Davis walked to the witness stand. His demeanor was as smug as ever. He took the oath, his face a mask of feigned innocence. Officer Davis, the defense attorney began. Can you explain your actions on the night in question? Davis leaned forward, his voice smooth. Of course. Dr. Carter was speeding and appeared aggressive when I pulled her over. Her tattoos, which resemble known gang insignia, raised red flags. I acted to protect myself and uphold the law. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Maya's jaw tightened as she fought to keep her composure. Lies, all of it. When the defense finished their questions, the prosecutor, a sharp and unyielding woman named Carla Torres, rose to cross-examine. Officer Davis, Torres began, her voice cold and calculated. You've stated that Dr. Carter appeared aggressive. Can you provide any concrete evidence to support this claim? Davis hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. It was more of an instinct. Instinct? Torres repeated, stepping closer. Or bias? She held up a series of still images captured from body camera footage, showing Maya's calm demeanor during the stop. Because this footage shows a composed and compliant Dr. Carter. Where is the aggression you described? Davis shifted uncomfortably, but before he could respond, Torres continued. And as for her tattoos resembling gang insignia, do you have any training in identifying such markings? No, but... No further questions. Torres cut him off, turning to the judge with a nod. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. Davis's credibility had been effectively dismantled, but the prosecution wasn't finished. Your Honor, Torres said, we would like to call our final witness, Detective Miguel. The room grew silent as Miguel entered, his face a mixture of resolve and nerves. He took the stand, his eyes briefly meeting Maya's. She nodded, silently willing him strength. Detective Miguel, Torres began. Can you describe your findings during your time within the police department? Miguel took a deep breath. I discovered a network of officers, including Captain Daniel and Officer Davis, who routinely suppressed evidence of misconduct. Payments were made to ensure silence, and those who tried to speak out were threatened. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Torres raised her hand, silencing the crowd. Can you provide proof of these claims? She asked. Miguel nodded, producing a series of documents and recordings that detailed years of corruption. The evidence was projected onto a screen for all to see. It was undeniable: financial transactions, emails, and even voice recordings implicating the accused. As the final piece of evidence was presented, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. The defense's confidence visibly waned. Daniel and Davis exchanged nervous glances, their facades crumbling. In her closing statement, Torres addressed the jury with fervor. This case is not just about Dr. Carter. It is about a system that has allowed corruption and discrimination to fester. You have the power to send a message that justice is not reserved for the privileged few, but for everyone. The defense's closing argument fell flat, their attempts to discredit the evidence ringing hollow in the wake of Miguel's testimony. The jury was dismissed to deliberate, and the courtroom emptied into the bright afternoon sun. Maya and Ethan sat on the courthouse steps, their hands intertwined. Whatever happens, Ethan said softly, I'm proud of you. Hours later, the jury returned. The courtroom was silent as the foreperson stood and read the verdict. We find the defendants guilty on all charges. A collective cheer rose from the crowd, both inside and outside the courthouse. Tears streamed down Maya's face as she embraced Ethan. Justice had prevailed, but more importantly, a system that thrived on silence had been exposed. The fight wasn't over, but this was a victory, a moment of triumph in the long battle for accountability and change. The courtroom steps were packed with reporters and supporters, their cheers and questions blending into a cacophony of noise. Dr. Maya Carter stood at the center of it all, her hand tightly clasping Ethan's. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to exhale. Justice had been served, but the journey was far from over. Dr. Carter, what's next for you? A reporter called out, shoving a microphone toward her. Maya looked at Ethan, then at Clara and Sarah, who stood nearby. Her resolve was clear as she answered. This victory is not just for me. It's for every person who has suffered under a system that failed to protect them. The fight doesn't end here. We'll continue pushing for accountability, reform, and true justice." Her words were met with applause and shouts of encouragement. The crowd's energy bolstered her as she descended the steps, moving past the sea of faces. The sunlight felt warm on her skin, a stark contrast to the months of darkness she had endured. That evening, Maya and Ethan returned home, their house feeling lighter than it had in months. The tension that had lingered between them seemed to have dissipated. They sat together in the living room, the remnants of their battle reflected in the bruises that were now fading and the thick folder of evidence still resting on the coffee table. "We did it," Ethan said, his voice soft but full of pride. Maya leaned her head against his shoulder. "We did. But there's still so much work to do." Ethan nodded. "And we'll do it together. No more secrets, no more half measures. This is our fight now." Over the following weeks, the city saw the beginnings of change. An independent commission was established to overhaul the police department, and several officers implicated in the scandal were removed from their positions. Protests evolved into community forums, with leaders like Clara and Sarah spearheading discussions on how to ensure lasting reform. Maya returned to the hospital, greeted by colleagues who viewed her with newfound admiration. Her patients, too, treated her as more than a doctor. She had become a symbol of resilience and courage. Yet, she remained humble, focusing on the work she loved while continuing to advocate for justice outside the hospital walls. One evening, she joined Ethan at a town hall meeting where local activists discussed plans for a community-led oversight board for law enforcement. As she spoke about her experiences and the importance of accountability, she felt the weight of her journey transform into a source of strength. As the meeting ended, an elderly woman approached her. "Thank you," the woman said, her voice trembling. "You've given us hope." Maya smiled, her heart swelling. "Hope is just the beginning," she replied. "Now we work for change." As she and Ethan walked home under the city's glowing streetlights, Maya felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in months. The fight for justice was far from over, but she knew she wasn't alone. Together, they were building something lasting, not just for themselves, but for everyone who deserved a better, fairer world. If this story of resilience and justice resonated with you, don't miss out on more powerful narratives that shine a light on systemic issues. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications to join us as we continue to uncover the truth and fight for change. Together, we can make a difference. What are your thoughts on Dr. Carter's journey? Share your perspective in the comments below. Your voice matters, and we want to hear from you. Join the conversation and let's work together to challenge injustice. Did you catch all the twists and turns in Maya's fight for justice? Share your favorite moment in the comments, and let us know what inspired you the most. Don't forget to like, share, and spread the word about this powerful story. Your engagement fuels the movement.